Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. Well, you've listened to us ramble about IndyCar for the summer. We've talked about a lot in terms of that, but now we're ready to get into what I'm sure you guys are ready for as well. It is football season. We're getting ever so close. High school football kicks off in about a week. Then you're going to have college football soon, NFL soon. It's going to be so much fun. But first, we're going to kind of venture into some new territory here on the Crash Course Podcast. For the first time ever, we're going to do a high school football preview. We're going to talk 6A, 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A. We're going to talk about it all. It's going to be a lot of fun. B. Scott, some uncharted waters for us to go into here, but it's going to be a lot of fun to get into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. High school football is something that's really starting to take off big time here in the state of Indiana. We're not just known as a basketball state anymore, have some really impressive talent coming out of this state. And high school football season actually kicks off this Friday with preseason. Essentially, it's their preseason. It's exhibition games, scrimmages. They call them scrimmages, but it's like watching a Colts preseason game. Basically, everybody's out there trying to get the rust completely shook off, and kickoff of the regular season is next week.
Wild to think about.
Friday Night Lights.
It's finally back. Now, before we get into it here, we do want to let you know that there's obviously a lot of schools in the state. So we're not going to get to everybody. We're going to basically have a formula for how we're going to do this. We're going to talk we're going to put out a storyline out there, talk about that. We're going to give a player to watch, a dark horse, and a state champ. We also want to let you know that we are not experts in any way on every team. So if we mess something up, we do apologize.
And hey, if there is something we did miss,
yeah, let us know.
And if there's something like you want to give a shout out to a team, or you're like, hey, look, here's something you guys completely overlooked about X team, please let us know on Twitter. We will be more than happy we're going to be covering high school football all year,
and all season this year as well.
Down in the comments, let us know. Let's give our schools some love, and we just can't wait to see the talent out on the field this fall.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting football season for sure. And let's not wait any longer. Let's go ahead and hop into it. First, we're going to start with 6A. It's going to be an exciting season there.
It's always exciting in 6A.
Right, a class that the last 2 years has been dominated by Center Grove. And so that's where we're going to start. Hot or cold? We're going to give a hot or cold take for each class. That's, of course, a segment of the show where we give a take and say whether or not it's a hot take or a cold take. And for 6A, the hot or cold question is this. Center Grove is the team to beat in 6A. And in my opinion, that is a cold take. Center Grove quarterback Taven Jackson is off to Tennessee. Caden Curry is headed to Ohio State, departing from a defense that was ranked 14th in the state. They also lose running back Daniel Weems, who was the second leading rusher the last 2 seasons, and their 2 leading receivers. And they also have to contend with a team that has played them really tough when they've matched up the last couple of years, and that is Cathedral. Cathedral moves up to 6A after winning the last 2 state championships at 5A. And they've been impressive. They have an impressive resume against 6A schools the last couple of years. They're always a power regardless. But they beat state runner-up Westfield 14-0 last season. They beat Brownsburg 20-7. They defeated Penn 37-0. They led Center Grove at halftime last year. Took a 14-point fourth quarter by the Trojans to finally pull away 21-6. And most importantly, Cathedral returns quarterback Danny O'Neill, who had nearly 3,000 yards passing last season. That was top 10 in the state. He had 33 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. They also bring back my guy, my 3C Media Male Player of the Year, Jerron Tibbs. He's their leading receiver. They also bring back Carson Johnson, their leading rusher. So, I mean, there's a lot of talent that comes back to that Cathedral team, and I think that gives them the edge to just be a little bit better than Center Grove. Center Grove's still going to come back strong. They're one of those teams that's always good, but I think Cathedral now, with the talent they have moving up to 6A, kind of makes them the team to beat in that class.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely a cold take. I mean, when you look at 6A, it's usually a handful of teams that are always up there. It's the Carmels, the Ben Davises, the Warren Centrals, the Center Groves. But now you have, Cathedral joining the race for 6A, and it's tough to replace your quarterback. It's tough to replace
Especially one who's
senior
off to an
leaders.
SEC team.
Right. That, and then to have a defensive lineman headed to the Big Ten as well. I mean, those two things right there they're tough to replace. I mean, replacing senior leaders is always going to be tough, but replacing that level of talent is tough. I mean, Center Grove, if there's a team that can do it, a program that can do it, it is Center Grove. But Cathedral just has so much returning from these dominant teams that they've had here as of late. Yes, I know now they're up at 6A. They were a 6A team even back in 5A. Let's just be honest. One thing I'm going to be interested though with Center Grove, isn't this the first year? Are they still in the MIC, or is this their first year out of the MIC?
I know there was a big storyline of them moving away. I thought
they basically like kind of were told, but got voted out, but decided to leave the MIC. I don't know. Really, so I'm interested to know what their schedule looks like this season if they're not in the MIC, and how, I mean, they usually typically play Cathedral anyways, but it'll be interesting because really running through the gauntlet of the MIC really helps a team like Cathedral, like Center Grove, prepare for the state tournament run.
Let's see, Center Grove, you're a little bit more of an aficionado for the MIC than I am, so I'll just run through the schedule. They open with Warren Central, then they play Carmel. They're at Louisville Trinity, then they're at Ben Davis. They have North Central, Lawrence Central.
They're still in the MIC.
Okay.
They're still in the MIC.
Okay. Because I thought
at least they may not be considered part of the MIC conference, but their schedule is at least MIC conference. Well, it's everybody.
Because I remember seeing a story about that, but maybe it was them.
Maybe it's a couple years from now.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was going to say. Maybe it's in a couple seasons.
We're just getting so much conference realignment confused from all levels.
Center Grove is going to be joining the Big Ten pretty soon, and
at this rate,
playing USC.
Cathedral will be knocking on the door of the Big Ten before we know it. I mean, they've already got a wide receiver headed to the Big Ten and a future quarterback that's most likely headed to the Big Ten as well. So, but yeah,
it's going to get sniped by the Pac-12. The Pac-12 needs to steal some teams.
Maybe. Yeah. So I think this is definitely a cold take. I think there are some other teams that are could be looked at as the team to beat as well. But obviously, you got to look at Cathedral hands down already.
Yeah, for sure. So looking at the toughest sectional, from that class, because one thing, just kind of like in like college football, as well, conferences really don't matter. Especially not in high school football. I mean, they matter for pride and that kind of thing, bragging rights. But other than
rivalries,
it's more about the sectional, because that's who obviously you're going to be playing come postseason play. And so we're going to take a look at the toughest sectional. And in my opinion, it's sectional 4. We talked about it a little bit before we started recording. You've got Westfield. They're the back-to-back state runner-ups. They finished ranked number 2 in 6A last season. You've got Carmel. They're always good. They finished ranked number 4 last season. In 6A, they've had at least 10 wins in 8 of the last 10 seasons. You've got Zionsville, who was the 5A runner-up the last 2 seasons. And now Carmel and Westfield especially have lost. Now, they have lost a lot of talent. Carmel and Westfield have, but it's going to be the most interesting sectional, to say the least. You're going to have all this talent, all these teams, that any one of these, if you were to tell me that's your state finals pick, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But maybe except for maybe Zionsville. I don't know if Zionsville can get there. I mean, they could.
They could. It's
right.
If you can come out of this sectional,
right,
there's no reason you can't. I mean, the question is, though, I just want to know, like, with the addition of Cathedral and Zionsville now, what is the pairing in the matchups like for regionals, for semi-state? That really, because it's like is, is the winner of the sectional cathedrals in and the winner of this sectional, are they like bound to play each other prior to the state championship? I mean, I don't know these.
Yeah, we don't know how the bracket
shakes out. I mean, I was always used to be under the assumption that it was like north and south. That's how it always broke up. And it was the north-south cutoff line was Marion County, Hamilton County, which was why Carmel always had such an easy path to the state championship, was because they never had to go through Ben Davis, Center Grove, or Warren Central to get there. All they had to go through was like Penn. And, well, okay. But I don't know how it all shakes out now. It's so mixed up. Maybe it still is that way. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. But that sectional, though, I think it's gonna be a bloodbath. No matter what,
yeah.
You've got so many good teams in that sectional.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wanted to go in a different direction, but then I looked because I was like, oh, I have the perfect one. It's going to be sectional 6 because that's where they're going to put Cathedral and Warren Central's in that sectional. I was wrong. The school that got the bump from sectional 6 to allow Cathedral to come in was Warren Central. So sectional 6 is now Cathedral, Lawrence Central, Lawrence North, and North Central. I mean, the toughest competition there is probably North Central or Lawrence North for Cathedral.
Which, I mean, that kind of makes sense because I know those 4 teams are all in the same basketball sectional, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and they are all within about a 15-minute bus ride from each other. Right. I mean, Lawrence Central and Cathedral are literally down the street from each other, 56th Street. Lawrence North and North Central, pretty much the same thing. I mean, you just hop on 82nd Street, go straight through Castleton, and Keystone at the crossing, and boom, you can. I mean, that's a 10 minutes apart. I mean, my wife went to North Central and I went to Lawrence North. We grew up 10 minutes apart from each other. So same thing there. And then Lawrence Central and Lawrence North, obviously, they're just like right around the corner from each other. So it does make sense. I mean, I guess out of all of these sectionals, I mean, these schools have like the shortest bus rides to go anywhere. But yeah, I mean, sectional 4 for 6A is going to be it's a bloodbath. Whoever comes out of that, I feel like, has a really strong chance of making a state championship run to face Cathedral.
We're also going to look at some players to watch here. For 6A, for me, my player to watch going into the season is Brownsburg quarterback Jaden Whitaker. He was 4th in total yards in 6A last season. He had 1,500 yards passing, nearly 500 yards rushing. He completed 66% of his passes, 10 touchdowns through the air, 7 on the ground. There's a lot of offensive talent returning on the Bulldogs team that finished number 5 in 6A last season, and I think Whitaker can have a big year. I think that's another team that I think can have a really strong season this year is Brownsburg.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good pick. For me in 6A, I mean, Jerron Tibbs is going to be really interesting out of Cathedral. I mean, he has a chance to be the number 1 wide receiver in the state of Indiana. I mean, he's already committed to go to Purdue, and he's going to have a lot of eyes on him now, especially being up in 6A. Danny O'Neill, the quarterback at Cathedral, is another one to really keep an eye on as well, because he is an up and coming junior that's starting to get a lot of Division I heavy looks. Also, I'm going to go with Purdue commit from Westfield, Dylan Thieneman. Yeah, Westfield lost a lot. You know, they're still back-to-back state runner-up finishes for them. This defense of Westfield is going to be still really good and led by Dylan Thieneman. Yes, he's the youngest of the 3 Thieneman brothers that have all played at Purdue, but apparently he's the best of all of them. So yeah, it's going to be a fun season to watch of some of these players, but those are the 3 players I'm keeping my eye on the most, just because I feel like some of them are up and coming. Some of them have kind of come out of nowhere. And then some of them are going to have big targets on their backs. So I'm interested to watch all three of those players, especially the seniors, see how they finish out their careers. I mean, you got the Westfield players that are hungry for that. They've been there. They've come up short every time they've been there the past 2 years. So how is that going to play out for them? Cathedral, are they just going to assert their dominance? And these players from Cathedral just assert their dominance and cement their legacy in 6A as well? It's not really just the players, but the storylines that I'm really looking at for 6A.
Yeah, I mean Westfield, I think too last year was really close. Like that was a down to the wire game against Center Grove. So I think it was a little bit more lopsided the first time around. So to be that close both times is pretty crazy. So dark horse and state champ for 6A. My dark horse is going to be Brownsburg. They finished ranked number 5 in 6A last season. They fell to Ben Davis in the regionals. They, like I mentioned before, they returned one of the more dynamic players in Jaden Whitaker. They also bring back leading rushers Garrett Sherrill and Caleb Marcus, which they both had over 900 yards rushing last season. Whitaker only threw 1 touchdown to a senior last season, meaning a lot of his targets are coming back. And this is a Brownsburg team that's going to be tough again this season, and I think they can be strong enough to contend for a state title. But ultimately, though, as far as state championship is concerned, I'm going with Cathedral. It's really tough to not go Cathedral. They returned one of the best passers in the state who only will get better in his junior season. Yeah, by the way, Danny O'Neill was only a sophomore last year when he lit 5A on fire. His top target, Jerron Tibbs, we've mentioned him countless times on the podcast. He's back. Their defense was top 5 in the state last year in terms of points per game. And if they can carry that over into 2022, I mean, they're going to be tough no matter what class you put them in. I'm going with Cathedral to be the state champs when it's all said and done.
Yeah, my dark horse, I'm looking at I don't really know if you can consider them a dark horse because they're always within the mix, but I'm looking at Carmel. This defense of Carmel is going to be really strong. Honestly, when you're looking at the powerhouse that Cathedral is and looking at that offense, you need to look at these teams that are going to have strong defenses if you want to look at somebody that can take out Cathedral. I'm looking at the Westfields. I'm looking at Carmels because they have teams that are going to be really solid on defense this year. So for me, my dark horse is Carmel just based on their defense. They have a really strong defensive line and linebacking core, and I'm really anxious to see the matchup between them and Cathedral because I feel like if you can disrupt that Cathedral offense any kind of way, it gives you a fighter's chance. But yeah, if you don't already know who I'm going with in 6A, you haven't been listening. Cathedral is my pick.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Carmel is a good dark horse because, I mean, you list off, I feel like there's, we did a tier list last year for the NFL teams like Super Bowl contenders on from there. And I think for 6A, I mean, Carmel definitely is in that state title tier, but they're kind of in that, like, they're barely on that cutoff as far as, like, you've got Center Grove, you've got Cathedral, you've got Westfield. I would consider them kind of teetering on that edge of being a step lower to contender as far as, like, here are my teams that are locks. Here's my teams that I think they're going to be in the mix. Carmel, I think, would be more in that second tier. So I think that is a good dark horse. I think I consider them kind of on the same level as Brownsburg. They're a team that's always good, but they lost a little bit of talent. We'll see how they shape up this year. And of course, that it's been a couple seasons since they've been to the state championship. So it's not as if they're in their early 2010s ways of always being there. So that definitely is a good pick.
Hey, by the way, if anybody's going to be heading out to any Westfield games, I'll be out there for a couple times this season. Definitely let me know if you're going to be out there. And yeah, I live right down the street. I live right down the street from Westfield High School now, so got to support the local community.
Let's move on now to 5A. We're our hot and cold question.
5A, the class that is breathing a huge sigh of relief as the top 2 contenders from the past 2 seasons have moved on.
The 2 teams that were in the state finals the last 2 years, Zionsville and Cathedral, have moved on to 6A. So that leads us right into this question. 5A is the most wide open class in Indiana. And that's definitely a hot take as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. I mean, the main reason is the fact that, like we said, Cathedral and Zionsville, the teams that have played in the last two state finals, are now in 6A. I mean, the state tournament as a whole last year was a bloodbath. You have number 2 Decatur Central falling to Cathedral in sectionals. You've got number 3 Harrison losing to number 12 Zionsville in the sectionals. Number 4 Valpo was the only top 5 team to advance out of sectional that first 3 weeks of sectional play. Um, Number 12 Zionsville made the state final despite having a 4-5 regular season. New Pal, who finished ranked, is down in 4A now. So a lot of the top teams either didn't make it out of sectionals, have moved on to a higher class, or have moved to a lower class. So it kind of opens that door to where you're kind of looking at, when you're trying to preview this season, you're kind of looking at some of the teams that were ranked like 7th, 8th, 9th, as far as teams that would contend this season, because a lot of those teams have moved on. So it is a wide open class as far as I'm concerned, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think this is definitely going to be a wide open class. I mean, yeah, you do have Chesterton that got bumped down from 6A, but I mean, it's gonna be a tough one. I think we're fine. I don't know. It's wide open. I don't have really a whole lot to say about it because I don't really. It's because it's that wide open. It's going to be tough to pinpoint exactly one player.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, looking even at the toughest sectional 10, in my opinion, you've got Valpo, who was number 4 in 5A last season. They're a top 40 team in the state in terms of points per game, points allowed per game, and margin of victory. So they're really good. You have Michigan City, who was the number 10 team last year, fresh off a semi-state appearance. They defeated Valpo in the sectional title game in 2 overtimes. Like you mentioned, Chesterton down from 6A. They finished the season ranked in the state's highest class, and that's just a recipe for another topsy-turvy tournament in terms of 5A. So that's a sectional right there, sectional 10, that's going to be very tough to get out of.
Oh yeah. For me, I'm looking at sectional 9. The Hammond Central, Hammond Morton, Maryville, or also known as Andrian, and Munster. When you look at, it's kind of, I don't know. For me, I'm looking at the teams that could potentially make the most noise, and Andrian Maryville is actually ranked 13 in the total top 25 Max Preps preseason top 25. So it'd be kind of fun. It's going to be fun to see that team. And really, I mean, the other one I'm keeping an eye on as well is sectional 10 with Chesterton, just with where they finished last year within 6A. And I feel like their drop down to 5A is totally having to do with population decrease. Because that's one of the ways you can drop down, and they weren't bad. So it's not like they dropped down because it's like, yeah, you haven't won any games in 6A for the last 3 seasons. You are the weakest link. Goodbye. No, it's your population has decreased. So, I mean, gosh, it's so tough to pick one. I mean, I guess the other one, looking at it, I did mention this one, or looking at this one, is sectional 12. Though the Fort Wayne schools are usually sneaky good. They usually have some pretty good prospects college wise. When you look at Fort Wayne Bishop Dwenger and Fort Wayne Snyder, those two are always always sneak somebody into that's a highly recruited prospect nationally. And it's like, are they going to go to Michigan or Notre Dame or Ohio State? And it's like, wait a second, who is this kid? Where did they come from? And it's like Fort Wayne's just a hotbed of like really athletic individuals. So that's another one to really keep an eye on, just because some of those teams are usually pretty sneaky. And there was a time where like Fort Wayne Snyder was like always there, or Bishop Dwenger too. Those are 2 really tough schools. So those are my sectionals to keep an eye on. It's hard to pinpoint one with all the movement. It really is.
Hey, and Snyder just had a former athlete go to the Super Bowl. So I mean, if that gives you
Yeah.
any indication of the talent they churn out, but can right along the lines of talent in 5A, my player to watch for 5A is going to be Bloomington North running back Cody McCulloch. I can pronounce words. McCulloch. He was a 3,000 yard rusher. In back, he's had back to back 1,000 yard seasons. He's got 3,000 yards for his career. He averages 8 yards per rush for his career, 52 total touchdowns. Last season, he had 1,100 yards, 16 touchdowns on the ground, ninth in 5A in rushing yards, most touchdowns in 5A, 610 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. I mean, he was just an absolute force, an absolute weapon for Bloomington North, and I think that he's going to help lead that team to a good year. So, Cody McCulloch is my player to watch for 5A.
Yeah, I definitely agree with. I was looking at Cody McCulloch as well. I mean, typically, I don't know what it is with that region in high school football. They usually have really good running backs, anyways. Um, and if you are able to put up 3,000 rushing yards and have back-to-back 1,000 yard seasons, that's impressive. That's really impressive. 8 yards per carry. Wow. But yeah, that's somebody that I've got my eye on as well. I mean, it's for me. I'll admit it's tough looking at these rosters and just deciphering who to really fully keep an eye on. Um, there's some that stand out, and I mean, most of them just kind of for me. But when I was looking through everything, his numbers really just they pop out to you, and especially being on a team you don't really hear too much about on the competition wise. So hopefully we can see big things out of this team. I mean, he's living down in an area down in IU country, and they're always looking for good running backs. So hopefully see continued big things out of him this year, and he can catch on with some of these some Big Ten programs that are looking to shore up their running back room.
So as we wrap up 5A here, our dark horse and state champ, my dark horse for 5A is going to be Castle. They finished ranked number 13 last season. Their quarterback, Cameron Tilley, finished fourth in 5A in passing yards, 1,700 yards, 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I mean, that's fourth in 5A, the same 5A that last year had Brady O'Neill from Cathedral. So, I mean, to be up there with the likes of him is pretty good. They return their top two leading rushers and receivers, so they've got that same kind of talent back. And they had a top 25 defense in the state last season in terms of points allowed per game. So I think they're going to be another strong team, another year of experience under their belt. I think they're going to be a tough out when it comes to the state tournament. But overall, my state champion is going to be Maryville from 5A. They went 12-1. They finished number 3 in 6A last season. Their class of 2023 has gone 33-5 with 3 semi-state appearances. Coach Brad Seas had the Pirates knocking on the door in the state at the state's highest level, because they did drop down from 6A to 5A, and I think they can get it done in 5A after spending all that time knocking on the door in 6A. I think they can get it done now that they've. I mean, they're still going to face some tough competition, but having been seasoned by that tougher competition, I think they're going to be ready to go.
Yeah, so for me, when I'm looking, the team that I'm looking out for, like my dark horse, is Chesterton. They did finish the season ranked in 6A and just got bumped down because of population. I feel like that talent level could transfer over and being could be a high level within 5A. It's going to be tough because when you look, I mean, coming up from up north, obviously they're probably going to be on the radars for the Fort Wayne schools, different things like that. But Chesterton is definitely my dark horse, being the new team to 5A. My state champ is Maryville as well. I mean, they returned so much, and they're coming off of a one loss season last year. So Maryville is my 5A state champ as well.
So let's now move on, excuse me, to 4A. And our hot or cold question there is comes from a team that just was so dominant, especially last year in the state finals, and that's Mount Vernon Fortville. The question is, Mount Vernon Fortville will repeat as state champs, and for me, hot or cold, that is a cold take. Quarterback Garrick Slonaker is at Georgetown College. He had a 3,000-yard season with 34 touchdowns. Their leading rushers, Keegan LaBelle and Trey Egler, 1,500 yards and 800 rushing yards, respectively. They're both gone. Their leading receiver, Ashton Gentry, is gone as well. So, excuse me, all that firepower from an offense that was just so electric, so good. The last couple of seasons, I mean, arguably the best offense in the state. It's just gonna be too much to replace for Mount Vernon Fortville. I still think they can have a good season. I still think they can be kind of knocking on the door in 4A. But overall, I just don't see them, getting over that hurdle again. Just missing so much talent from last year.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely a cold take as well. They didn't even make the preseason total top 25, and if you're returning state champ, you at least get that thrown at you,
especially
to
in the
help
top
you
three
out.
classes too.
Yeah, within the top 3 classes. What's surprising though, when you look at the Max Preps preseason total top 25, there's only one school accounted for in 5A, but there's a whole handful accounted for in 4A. 4A is so much tougher than 5A right now. So yeah, that goes to show you how wide open 5A really is. And I was wrong. There's 2 Marivilles. Andrian is not the is a different one. There's 2 Marivilles ranked in the Max Preps preseason top 25. So yeah, see, we're not experts in this whatsoever.
Right. Well, there's just there's so much, and because it's high school, like there's no ESPN experts, there's no CBS articles, there's no NBC, whatever Pro Football Focus to like go.
Oh, there are Indy Star articles
that are behind
if you're willing to pay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's definitely a work in progress and patchwork. But John Harrell, you come in clutch as always. Max Preps, you've got some good supplemental information as well, and that's really what you have to live and die by when you cover high school sports.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a cold take for me. I mean, if you can't even crack that list as a returning state champ, it's gonna be tough. And there's just there's some really it's a deep pool in 4A. And then you add in schools like Brebeuf, who's the 3A runner up, who returns quite a bit, minus defensive end Joe Strickland. But they return quite a bit. So the pool just got deeper. And when you are in the class with Roncalli, you can never count out the Roncalli Rebels. So yeah, it's a cold take.
Well, hey, that's a perfect transition, because when you're looking at toughest sectionals in 4A, look no further than sectional 21. I mean, Roncalli was the number 1 team in 4A heading into sectionals. They're 25-2 the last 2 seasons. You've got number 6 Mooresville. There you have 4 straight winning seasons. 3 of those have been 10+ win seasons. You've got Northview, who finished ranked last season, and oh, by the way, you add Brebeuf, the 3A runner-ups from last season, who have an electric amount of talent coming back. So that sectional, I mean, it's one of those things we talked about a little bit when we did the Hoosier High School Huddle for basketball. There's some sectionals where we're like, man, you just kind of, it's a shame that one of those teams has to lose so early in the process, because it's gonna go.
Oh, it's a shame 3 of those schools have to lose so early.
Well, because you're gonna look at that like in a year. We're gonna be doing this show next year, and you're gonna look at it and be like, oh, they lost in the sectional semifinals. You're like, oh, but wait, it's because they had probably 3 other state finals contenders in that same sectional.
Yeah. Yeah, that it's the same one for me there as well. I mean, when you have 3 schools that are ranked in the preseason top 25 with Mooresville, Brebeuf, and Roncalli, that's a tough one. And yeah, so, and all of those schools are producing talent that is moving on to all different levels of the collegiate scene. So that sectional 21 is gonna be fun. Unfortunately, there's a couple schools it's also got some of the IPS schools in there, unfortunately for them, that, you know, they have to go up against that high level of competition in sectionals. But hey, for Buff, Mooresville, and Roncalli, that's going to be a battle, man.
Wait, like we said for those basketball sections, it's a good palate cleanser for the rest of the tournament. And you mentioned Mooresville. We both mentioned Mooresville. That's where I'm going for my player to watch as well. Mooresville quarterback Nick Patterson. He threw for 2,970 yards last season. He completed 70% of his passes. He had 37 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He's also the team's leading rusher from last season. He rushed for 700 plus yards 2 seasons ago as well. He to put his numbers in perspective, he threw for 700 more yards and 16 more touchdowns in 3 fewer games than the season prior. And in comparison to state finals winning quarterback Garrett Sloneker, he threw just 50 fewer yards. He had a better completion percentage and more touchdown passes by playing 4 fewer games. So in fewer games, he was as productive as the guy who led probably the best offense in the state last season. So that bodes well for a strong season. That's why I think Nick Patterson is going to be the player to watch in 4A.
So my player to watch in 4A was one of the better players in 3A last year. That is Brebeuf quarterback Nolan Buckman. Nolan Buckman really kind of just appeared on the scene as far as like in the name of the quarterbacks around the state of Indiana and he really made a name for himself in that state championship game. Really started that game off really strong, going toe to toe with Indiana Mr. Football Brady Allen, who, I mean, Brady Allen was a top level recruit across the entire country. And Nolan really stood toe to toe with him in that game as much as he could. Nolan's also one of these guys that he continuously gets better and better each season. So, I mean, the steps we saw him take from his sophomore year to his junior year were unbelievable. So I'm really excited to see what he's able to do and what kind of step forward he's able to take going from his junior year to his senior year now, especially now that there's going to be a lot of attention on him. He came into last year kind of under the radar, all eyes at Brebeuf were on Joe Strickland, rightfully so. And then also all eyes in 3A were on Brady Allen, rightfully so. And Nolan Buckman just he stepped up. He led a really high-powered offense that was, if the defense wasn't clicking, the offense was firing on all cylinders. I mean, this was a team that took out the number 1 team in the state in their regional. So it was an exciting game. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of progress he's made from junior year to senior year and how that run to a state championship game has helped him in that growth and also shown him what else he needs to work on.
Yeah, it's going to be a good season for Brebeuf, I think, this coming season. Looking at dark horses and state champs. For me, my dark horse is going to be East Central. They finished number 10 last season in 4A. They had a 10-3 record. They're in the top 30 in terms of points per game in the state. They were 34th in the state in points allowed per game, 14 points, and 21st in terms of margin victory. They return a lot of starters. Quarterback Cole Burton is back. Their leading rushers Josh Ringer and Ryan Brotherton are back. Leading receiver Eli Aston is back. So they're going to have a strong season, I think. But my state champion for 4A is going to be Mooresville. They return a top 5 offense in the state last season. They finished 6th in 4A. Whenever you have a Mr. Football candidate, you're in prime position. Nick Patterson had the Pioneers in the semi-state 2 seasons ago. They play above their class in 6 of 9 games this season, so they'll be seasoned come tourney time. I really think Mooresville is going to be a fun team to watch. And can hoist the trophy at the end of the year in 4A. So I'm going with Mooresville.
So my sleeper, it's kind of hard to pick them as a sleeper as well, just because of their history within the state of Indiana. But my sleeper is Roncalli. like I said earlier, you just can't ever really sleep on the Roncalli Rebels. You never. It's always tough. I mean, they're always one of the best teams out there. So it kind of feels weird to pick them as a dark horse, but they haven't been there recently. They haven't been on top of the mountain recently. So you have to pick them, look at them as a dark horse to get back there. But yeah, you're right. Mooresville looks like to be the class of 3A. I mean, and you have to pick them until proven otherwise. If they come out and they just kind of look mundane, it's like, okay, yeah, we can start looking elsewhere. But numbers don't lie. And right now, the numbers do indicate that Mooresville should be standing atop the Class 3A come Thanksgiving weekend.
So we've still got 3 classes to go here on our Indiana High School football preview show. But first, let's talk about our friends of the show. First of all, from Anchor, the Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Also, the Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Eat Lunch and Board Game, heard weekly on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, and wherever podcasts can be heard. Board games build bridges. Moving on to 3A. And the hot or cold question there, it was another tough one because you had a team that was in the state finals last season moving up a class, so trying to figure out who's going to stand atop that summit coming into the season. And the hot or cold question is, West Lafayette is the 3A favorite. Because they did finish as the number 1 team in 3A last season prior to the tournament. And for me, that's actually a hot take. They're top 10 in the state in points per game. They were the 5th best They had the 5th best defensive average. They're top 5 in terms of margin of victory, and they have lots of returning players. They have quarterback Max Mullis, who had 1,700 yards, which was 11th in 3A, 29 touchdowns. He had 500 yards rushing as well. They returned their leading rusher, Connor Blankman. He had 660 yards and 9 touchdowns. Matthew Richardson, who was key on that defense, he's back. He had 50 tackles and 3 sacks last season. So they've got a lot of talent coming back, and they were the number 1 team. And so I think that's why they're going to be kind of the team to beat and have that target on their back heading into the season.
Yeah, this is definitely a hot take. To me, it's really funny how West Lafayette has all of a sudden turned into this football factory here as of late. You kind of thought, oh yeah, they got lucky when they had George and Yanni Karloftis, but then it's like it just kept continuing, and I mean, it's great. What's funny is, like, I remember walking by this very small school, unassuming school, all the time when heading to friends' houses when I was at Purdue, and you just all of a sudden, boom, there's West Lafayette High School. Oh, hi, there you are. But when people say it's literally a stone's throw away, they're not lying. But yeah, I mean, it's fun to see this small school that kind of gets overlooked in the landscape of the Lafayette community, and how they've really become a legitimate football factory. So yeah, I think it is a hot take that they are the favorite. They're turning out some of the best talent in the state of Indiana year in and year out here as of late.
And looking at the toughest sectional in 3A, once you get down to 3A, the disbursement of talent kind of gets a little bit, further apart. I mean, for the top 4 or the top 3 classes, 6A to 4A, you might have, a sectional. Heck, we just talked about one in 4A where you have 3 potential state finals contenders in one sectional. So you don't have that as much as you go lower down. But I'm going to go with sectional 30. You've got state champ Gibson Southern from last season. You've got Mount Vernon Posey, who finished as the number 9 team last season in the class. You've got Owen Valley, who was the top 12 team in the class last season. So even if these may not necessarily be the best teams in the class, I think it's going to be a very tightly contested sectional.
Yeah, I'm actually going one sectional prior to you. Oh gosh, where is it? I hate when I lose the number. I'm going with sectional 29. It consists of Crawfordsville, Danville Community, Monrovia, North Montgomery, Speedway, Tri-West, Hendricks, and Western Boone, otherwise known as Webo. That one just got some history in it. I think like Danville and Monrovia can put up a fight. I mean, Tri-West looks really good this year, and you can never discount Webo. I mean, how many state titles do they have? How many state title appearances do they have? I mean, when you think of Indiana high school football historically, Western Boone pops into mind, Ben Davis, Carmel, Sheridan, schools like that just always seem to come to the forefront of your mind. So anytime you have a program that is known historically, it's always a fun one to watch, whether they're on a down year or not. You always know you're going to get something exciting out of one of those schools. So I'm keeping an eye on sectional 29 because of Western Boone and Tri-West being both in that sectional.
Well, I remember the first year I covered, just one team for Indiana SRN. It was Park Tudor, and their sectional championship game was against Webo. And I remember going into it thinking like, oh, maybe Park Tudor's got there. Maybe we can have a chance. I think it ended up being like 45-12 or something like that. The Webo won. Like Webo just ran away with it. They're such a good team. But I'm glad you mentioned Tri-West Hendricks, because that's where I'm going for my player to watch. Because their quarterback, Ty Owens, I mean, last season, 5th most yards in 3A. He had nearly 2,500 yards, 2,479. He had 2,200, nearly 2,300 yards passing, 4th in the class behind some pretty talented names, Brady Allen and Nolan Buckman, as well as Garrett Yoon. So he's the only 2,000-plus yard passer returning to 3A. He's also a top 10 passer in the state. He led the Bruins to their first double-digit win season since 2014, the year they won state. So Ty Owens is primed for a fantastic season at the 3A level.
So the player that I'm looking at is Matthew Richardson of West Lafayette. You mentioned it earlier. Last year, he was a key player on that defense with 50 tackles and 3 sacks. He was playing alongside Mo Omuwade. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, who's now on to Purdue, who is easily making the 3 deeps, apparently, as a guy that doesn't have very much football experience, but he's a very powerful player. So when you're playing alongside somebody of that caliber, sometimes all the attention gets put onto them, and now the attention is going to be placed on you. How can you perform when you are that guy that offensive lines are keying on and blocking the hardest? Are you going to be able to keep those numbers consistent from last year? Are you able to grow on those numbers and continue to be a leader for your team? That's going to be something I'm going to keep my eye on with him. I feel like that defense, that team will go as far as their defense can take them, and they're usually pretty good defensively. They usually have a defensive stud. So I'm looking at Matthew Richardson to be that guy that steps up and really helps carry that defense next year or this coming year.
So as we wrap up the Class 3A, dark horse and state champion, my dark horse is going to be Tri-West. In addition to Ty Owens, they do return their leading rusher and Devin Brown, who was close to 1,000 yards. They have Jeff Marsh back, who is 3rd on the team in receiving. They have some key pieces of a defense that was knocking on the door of being top 50 in the state. But we've talked about them a lot in this 3A discussion. My state champion is West Lafayette for a lot of the reasons I mentioned earlier. Top 10 team in the state. On all sides of the ball, statistically, they returned Max Moles and a slew of players that were key to the number 1 ranking last season, and they lost to Brebeuf in the sectional, which can't happen this year. So I got West Lafayette hoisting the trophy the new year at Lucas Oil Stadium.
So my dark horse team, I don't really have a reason other than they're due. It seems like they just haven't been at the same level as of late, but they've been there before. I'm looking at Indianapolis Bishop Chatard. I hate to say Indianapolis in front of it. It's Chatard. Come on, it's Chatard. That's how everybody knows them. So I'm looking at Chatard as my dark horse just because I don't really have a good read on a lot of these other teams, and I want to be different than you. So, and Chittard, I mean, I could have gone Weibo, but they kind of have seemed to be down here the past couple of years as well. Chittard, being a private school, can technically draw in talent.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, it's a gray area. I mean, you can send information as to why somebody should come to Chittard to anybody. So, just saying. And Chittard does, I mean, okay, so Chittard plays in a conference that is also playing schools that are up in 4A. Just so you are aware, it's the Indiana Crossroads Conference. Is it the Crossroads Conference? I forget what it's called, but it consists of a lot of the Catholic schools within the Indianapolis metro, excluding Cathedral. So like Brebeuf, Ron Colley, Guerin Catholic, schools like that. So they do play some teams that are up in class. So that always kind of helps prepare you a little bit more for the road through sectionals, regionals, and all that. So I'm looking at Chittard as my dark horse. Yeah, and my pick is West Lafayette as well. They're number one for a reason. Preseason, they're good. They like I said, they've turned themselves into a football powerhouse. So I can't wait to see this team how they can live up to that expectation, because I mean they're going to be hungry. This is going to be a very hungry team after getting beaten in the sectional championship last year to Brebeuf. I mean, we all thought, okay, when you look at that sectional championship last year, the winner of that was going to state, and that was the case. The winner of that went to state and had a date with Gibson Southern. So they have something to prove, because they were really good last year and they're going to be really good again this year.
So only 2 classes to cover as we head down the stretch run here of the high school preview show. We're now moving on to 2A. And the question there, hot or cold, Andrean is the best team in 2A. It was a team that was a team that won the state championship last year, and for that reason, not that reason solely though, I'm gonna say that is a hot take. You return Scott Ballantyne at quarterback. He was third in 2A in passing, 2,860 yards, 27 touchdowns. They also have Drake Bowen back. He was their leading rusher with 965 yards and 18 touchdowns. He was also the leading tackler, 105 tackles on the season, 3 sacks, 3 interceptions. And that was a defense that was ranked 30th in terms of points allowed per game. They have a lot of other talent athletes on the defensive side of the ball as well. It was something where because when we did the state finals preview last year, I thought Drake Bowen was like going to Notre Dame next year, or like for this season.
He should have been on Notre Dame this year.
Right. And so I was like, when I saw that he was back, I was like, oh, okay, well then 100%. It's that Andrean team is going to be tough to beat. So yeah. Andrean is the best team in 2A in my opinion.
And Andrean is coming into the season ranked 13th in the state overall. Right. Yeah, I jumped the gun. As a 2A school, I jumped the gun on that one prematurely earlier. I got my Marivals all screwed up. But yeah, I mean, it's a hot take. I mean, when you have a player that's committed to Notre Dame at the 2A level, I mean, that says something. I mean, let's just be honest. He's committed to Notre Dame. He's got Mr. Football in the bag. If he just shows up and produces, he's got Mr. Football in the bag. I don't know who else could really contend for it right now. So, I mean, when you look, I mean, a wide receiver, maybe Jerron Tibbs, if he just completely goes off, but I mean, it could, because Danny O'Neill is not eligible as a junior. So,
well, it's the fact too that he makes an impact on both sides of the ball too. So he's not just like, because
let's also be honest, it's a little political, and he's going to Notre Dame.
I mean, fair, but I mean,
Jack Kaiser was the same situation. He was like a 2A, I believe, 1A, yeah, 1A,
Pioneer, yeah.
And he beat out George Karloftis and David Bell for Indiana Mr. Football. It's like, it's because he's going to Notre Dame. Okay, politics, got it. Because like David Bell and George Karloftis were like the Gatorade Indiana high school football players of the year. I don't know who won it, but Like Jack Kaiser wasn't even on the radar for that, and it was named Mr. Football. So yeah,
Well,
Drake
also though,
Bowen,
who
Mr.
who
Football, call it now.
who decides the Gatorade? Because I'm sure they didn't look deeper, like all the way deep enough to look at 1A talent either,
Oh,
though.
I'm sure. I mean, come on.
I mean, I guess they did.
How do you not notice? Oh, there's the player of the year in Indiana. We're just
That's
not
fair.
gonna. Yeah, I mean, it's not like it wasn't plastered everywhere that Jack Kaiser, Indiana's Mr. Football. I mean, but yet the recruiting rankings did not rank him as the number one player in the state of Indiana.
Right.
Um, so yeah, Drake Bowen, calling it now. But yeah, this is definitely a hot take. I mean, when you have that level of talent in 2A, good luck to the other teams.
We also want to say good luck to the teams that we talk about for our toughest sectional. Because, like 3A, there's not really a sectional with 3 or 4 tough teams, but I'm going with this one is a little tougher to pick. But the one I'm going with is sectional 35. They have Eastside and Fort Wayne Lures, who are both top 5 teams in 2A last season, as well as top 50 teams in the state in terms of the Sagarin ratings. Both teams lost a lot of talent, but if they have similar success, the winner of that sectional will go a long way. So not a lot of deep cuts on this one, but I think that will be a tough sectional to watch.
Yeah, that one is going to be tough. I mean, you also got Central Noble in there. They're typically up there. I mean, just looking around at these, I mean, I guess if another one I had to look at is sectional 38. I mean, you got Heritage Christian, Cardinal Ritter, um, Eastern Hancock, Northeastern. I mean, there's
Yeah.
some pretty good talent there. I mean, Cardinal Ritter and Heritage Christian should be a pretty good matchup right there. So if I had to look at another one that kind of does stand out to me, I would have to say sectional 38 does as well.
Heritage Christian, you might hear a little bit about them later. I mean, I looked at that sectional as well, and I think that sectional is going to be good in terms of. I think that's just going to be an entertaining sectional. I think
I
there's
mean,
going to be a
also
lot of.
sectional 40. I mean, you got Evansville, Mater Dei, North Posey, Tell City, and Forest Park.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess maybe that would be a really good one for basketball, but
Yeah.
I mean, football. I mean, Evansville Mater Dei is,
Runner up.
is a
Not sure.
yeah, they're a pretty good program. I mean, Evansville Mater Dei is just good at everything. It seems like because they're a private school and they can, you know.
You mentioned him. We talked about briefly earlier, and you pick him as the Mr. Football coming out of Indiana this year. Player to watch: Andrean running back, linebacker Drake Bowen. He was 10th in 2A in touchdowns last season with 21. He had 18 rushing with 965 yards on the ground. He was top 30 in 2A in terms of tackles with 105. He was a force on a strong Andrean defense last season. He's a Notre Dame commit. And if he can have similar success, to last season, 20 touchdowns, maybe get over 1,000 yards rushing. If he can be impactful on offense and defense again, I think Drake Bowen's going to be set for a special year. So that's my player to watch for this season.
I mean, yeah, Drake Bowen's a given as a player to watch, but I'm actually going to watch his quarterback, Scott Ballantyne. Honestly, if Drake Bowen's going to have the kind of year that he's going to have, he's going to need some other players on his team to step up and kind of take the load off a little bit because everybody knows Drake Bowen's coming. Everybody's going to prepare for Drake Bowen. Let's just be honest. I mean, whether or not they can stop him is another thing. But if you want this team to go as far as they believe they can go again, you need some other players to step up. And the first player that really is going to have to help make that happen is Scott Ballantyne. I mean, look, he did throw last year for over 2,800 yards and 27 touchdowns. If he can put up those kind of numbers again and kind of spread the ball around and cause defenses to have to spread out and not just key in on Drake Bowen, this team can be really special, and Drake Bowen can have a really special season.
So wrapping it up here for 2A, my dark horse and state champion. My dark horse is Heritage Christian. Mentioned him a little bit earlier in the program. They finished 2A number 3 last season. They bring back quarterback Kyle Antone, who returns as a top 15 passer in class, 1,400 420 passing yards, 16 touchdowns. He had 400 plus rushing yards as well. They returned some key members on the defensive side of the ball from last season. They were top 65. They were top 65 in the state in offensive average, defensive average, and margin of victory. Coach Kyle Ray has done a lot of great things with that squad since taking over 7 seasons ago, and I think they could make a run. Also, I wanted to make a little bit more of a sympathy, not sympathy. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it, but sentimental. There we go. That's the word I wanted. More of a sentimental pick because I did get to call a game.
Used to call them.
Well, no, I didn't call Heritage Christian, but I called. Kyle Ray was like our coach analyst in one of the state finals games that I broadcasted for Indiana SRN. So
you did call them. You did call them once. I was supposed to fill in for you one time, and then I was told I wasn't wanted.
Yeah, I did do their game against what was it, Indianapolis Shortridge. I did that game that they played because I think Park Tudor or whoever we were, Traders Point, I think had an off week. Or yeah, that's what it was. They were playing Anderson Prep Academy. Traders Point was, and they didn't have I think they ended up suspending their football program. So they're like, hey, we need to put you on a game, so let's do Heritage Christian. So that was fun. Got to meet Kyle Ray. He's an awesome guy, and I hope they're gonna have a good season.
Heritage Christian has really nice facilities for a 2A.
Yeah,
I mean, considering this is a team. This is a program that hasn't been in existence very long. And like, I think it was like their second or third year in existence. They were state runner up. And for the longest time, they did not have a home field to play on. They played at Lawrence North when LN was on the road. So they played on Saturdays. I believe they played a lot of games on Saturdays, but now they have a beautiful field. I mean,
beautiful field, beautiful press box that sits like on
beautiful
top
press
of their
box.
gym.
Yeah, yeah,
which is crazy. So yeah, I think they'll have a good year. But yeah, state champion goes without saying. Pretty much, I think it's going to be Andrean again. It's tough to ignore the talent they return. Talked about it extensively already. They bring back so much talent on offense and defense. They have two of the best players in the state, and Scott Ballantyne and Drake Bowen. I know it's boring to to pick a repeat champion. I know we've got long-winded with our talking about how good Andrean is, but it's because they're so gosh darn good. So I've got Andrean as my state champion for 2.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Heritage Christian is definitely a good dark horse. I'm looking at them. I'm also looking at Evansville Mater Dei as your state runner-up. It's always hard to tell. Mater Dei is always consistent. It seems like in any sport. They get these kids that start playing sports at a young age, and they grow up through the Mater Dei system. And by the time they get up to high school, they're lights out. And it's been that way for a very long time. Trust me, I know. I was a wrestler and wrestled against Evansville Mater Dei, so that's their main sport. They just breed wrestlers down there for some reason. But it's tough to pick between Heritage Christian and Evansville Mater Dei. Heritage Christian is the known commodity that I feel like could overtake Mater Dei and make that trip to the state championship game. But yeah, my state champ is Andrean as well. I mean, I don't need to go any further than that.
So
you've already all heard it.
Finally wrapping up the classes here. It's Class 1A. Last year, Lutheran was able to get the victory over Adams Central. And so the question is, hot or cold? Indianapolis Lutheran will make their third state final in 4 years. They made it in 2020. They made it in 2021. So can they get back again? 2019 and 2021. But for me, that's a cold take. They're defending state champions. Coach Dave Pash always has that team in contention. They're always so good. They do return Joe Davis, who had 1,200 yards rushing, and Micah McKay, who was their leading receiver last season. But they lose such a talent in Montesee Clay. He is gone. He was their quarterback and leading rusher. He had 2,564 yards passing, 32 touchdowns. He had 1,925 yards rushing, 33 touchdowns. So, I mean, 65 touchdowns, rushing and passing the football. That's insane. Lutheran does return some key pieces from a top 30 defense in the state last season, 13 points allowed per game. But it's going to be tough to make another deep turning run without a dynamic player like Montesee Clay. Montesee Clay was on the 2019 team as well. He was one of their receivers on that squad that ended up going, and falling just short of Lafayette Central Catholic. So they lose a lot of talent, and that's just a lot hard to ignore. But they are going to be in contention. They're going to be another good school, but I just don't think they get back to the state final.
I mean, hey, look, Lafayette Central Catholic's up there in 2A.
True.
So I'm going to go with this as a hot take. Look, when you are a part of a program that has made runs to the state finals like Lutheran has, you see that talent graduate ahead of you. You don't want to be that the part of that program that doesn't get back there. There's been a precedent that's been set, and to not make it is a huge letdown on your legacy, your class's legacy as seniors. So like the seniors this year are looking for that third state finals in 4 years. They haven't been, there's only one time they haven't been. They want their legacy to be, they made it. So I think this is a hot take, especially when you get down to, I mean, it doesn't matter. 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A, non-class sports. It doesn't matter. If you have a successful program, your seniors do not want to be the class that drops the ball and does not get back to where your program believes it belongs. And once you have that mindset, you can keep getting back there. So I think this is a hot take. I think they get back to their third state finals in 4 years.
Well, it's going to be tough for them to get there because when I look
it's going to be tough, yeah.
When I look at toughest sectionals, I look at sectional 47, which is where they're at. You have Lutheran, who has had 10 or more wins in 5 of the last 6 seasons. They made 2 of the last 3 state finals. They made semi-state in 2018, so they've had such a strong run getting there. You also have Park Heritage, who was 10-3 last season, number 5 in 1A. They were 31st in terms of points per game last season. You have South Putnam, who was number 8 in 1A last season. They were 20-4. They've been 20-4 the last 2 seasons. You've got Covenant Christian, who finished number 10 last season. They're the 2020 state champions who went through Lutheran to get to that state championship and took Lutheran to the wire in the sectional championship last year. You've got North Central Farmersburg, who finished number 13 last year. Even if 3 of those teams carry the success from last year into this year, it's going to be a dogfight. So that's going to be a really tough sectional to get through.
Yeah, I agree. Sectional 47 has Slaughterhouse written all over it. And I feel like anybody that can come out of this one has what it takes to make that trip to Lucas Oil Stadium Thanksgiving weekend.
Looking at players to watch, I'm going to go with Park Tudor quarterback DJ Gordon. He had 1,353 yards passing, 17 touchdowns last season. He had 710 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns last season, so 30 touchdowns there. He was 9th in 1A in yards. He led an offense that was top 35 in terms of points per game. And oh, by the way, that was only as a sophomore. So he's going into his junior season. He's got a lot of he had a year to really, grow, had a lot of great stats last season, and I think we'll only build on that. I mean, we saw what a dual threat quarterback can mean to a team that with state title aspirations with Montesee Clay, and I think DJ Gordon can be just as impactful for Park Tudor. So I think Park Tudor is going to do some great things.
Yeah, so my player to watch is actually Brady Beal. I love defense. I think at the high school level, if you can have a really, really strong defense, you have a legitimate shot of winning a state championship. And Brady Beal is that kind of player. I mean, look, he had 151 tackles last year. That's a lot. You have a nose for the ball when you have that. I mean, if you can be an anchor for your defense and help lead a really strong defense, there's no reason you cannot be a state championship contender. So I'm looking at him. I mean, when you have those kind of tackle numbers, that pops. that stands out to you. I mean, I haven't watched him play, but a number like that, if I'm just looking through stat sheets, a number like that really stands out to you. And it's like, okay, can you continue that? Can you do it again? Because people know you're coming now, and they're gonna be scheming for you and blocking against you. So can you put up numbers like that again? If you can, wow. Hold on tight.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Brady Beal, because more about his team, South Adams, here in a bit as we move on into our dark horse and state championship picks to round out the podcast here tonight. First of all, my dark horse. This is just another sentimental, selfishly optimistic pick for me, but I think they were ranked highly last year, and I think they could come back and do well. And that is Monroe Central. And that's the reason why they're, a optimistic pick for me is because, and a sentimental pick for me is because they played in the same conference as Cowan, my alma mater, when I was growing up. Of course, that's when both schools were basketball only. I don't know that they're in the same conference anymore, especially not football, because Cowan football doesn't exist, undefeated since the 1900s. What can I say? But they were ranked number 2 in 1A last season. They've got 10 or more wins in 4 of the last 6 seasons. They return a lot of key pieces from a defense that was number 1 in the state in terms of defensive average. They've lost a lot of talent from their offense, but they're really well coached, and I believe they can make a run. So I think Monroe Central could be a team that could knock on the door of Lucas Oil Stadium come November. But my state champion, you brought up one of the players from that roster, and that is South Adams. They have a lot of key returners. Owen Wayner threw for 1,665 yards, 20 touchdowns as a sophomore last season. You bring back Maverick Somerset, who had 558 yards rushing and 11 touchdowns. And you mentioned him, Brady Beal, third in 1A in tackles with 151, led the team in fumble recoveries as well.
That was third.
Right.
So there was 2 other guys that had more tackles. That just
insanity.
It is.
But yeah, he had a great season last year. They have 3 state sectional titles. They did lose to Covenant Christian by just 1 point in the state finals in 2020. They have a top 60 ranked defense in the state last season, ranked number 7 in 1A. They've got a lot of talent returning from a strong team last season, and I think they can get their first state title program, their first state title in program history. So South Adams, they're my team to beat in 1A.
So my dark horse, I'm actually going with Park Tudor as my dark horse. When you have a quarterback like DJ Gordon, that is a huge piece of the puzzle. I mean, if you have a quarterback that can just do just about anything like DJ Gordon can, you have the opportunity to win a lot of games. Your quarterback will keep you in those games and will the team to victory, essentially. That's what a good quarterback can do for a team. Just as good as a good defense can do a lot for a team, a good quarterback can do a lot for a team as well. So because of that, and being in 1A, I mean, I really kind of feel like 1A is a little open more so this year. Not as wide open as 5A, but I would definitely say probably the second most wide open class in all of the state. But I'm going with Park Tudor there. My state champ, I am going South Adams as well. Look, I talked about a good defense can win you a state championship, but when you also have a good offense that goes on top of that good defense, that's the recipe. That's what it takes to win a state championship. I mean, 3 straight sectional titles. That's an impressive number. That's not an easy thing to do. They have been to Lucas Oil in recent years. So they know what it takes to get there. They do have that taste in their mouth of losing by 1 point to Covenant Christian. So these seniors at least have something to prove. And, I think this is it. This is the year South Adams raises that state of Indiana wooden cutout.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
I mean, there's no name for the trophy.
No, it's not. They need to come up with a name. I think that'd be really.
And they need to go back to the old, like when I was in high school. I loved the way that the trophies looked. Now, there was no color to them when I was in high school. Now there's too much color and it's too rounded. It looks too soft, and the medals there's too much going on the ribbon around that they put around your neck. It's way too busy with the IHSAA logo, first place smeared all over it. When we won, it was a blue ribbon with the Indiana medallion that stayed the same at the bottom. Simple and clean. I don't know. I'm turning into that old man. Hey kids, get off my lawn.
Back in my day, it was
back
like
in my
this.
day. Yeah.
Oh man, but that wraps it up for this week's edition of the podcast. We talked a lot of football, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. We previewed all the classes, and we're excited for the season to start. Remember, you can like us on Facebook, 3C Media. You can follow us on Twitter at 3C Media Sports. Go subscribe on the YouTube channel if you're listening to us on the audio version of the podcast. Go subscribe, like, ring the bell. Also, go follow 3C Media Sports on TikTok. We've got a lot of traction talking about the oval versus road course debate for IMS, so go check that out. And then remember, you can listen every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can follow me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87.
We are going to be off next week, but in 2 weeks, it'll be the 200th episode special for the Crash Course Podcast. So make sure you're locked into that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, have a good one, everybody.